Okay. Before we begin, I'd like to read a land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge the Narragansett, Wampanoag, and Niantic peoples on whose traditional and ancestral unceded lands the state of Rhode Island currently exists. We deliver this land acknowledgement to recognize the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land and to the Narragansett, Wampanoag, and Niantic communities today. We do it to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty, political and cultural rights, and the issue of restitution, and to commit ourselves to truth-telling about the past, to structural change, and to restorative justice. We'd also like to note that the existence and legacy of the state of Rhode Island would not be possible without the labor of enslaved and indentured Black people. We acknowledge, respect, and honor those whose forced labor allows us to work, live, and enter in community in this space today. So tonight's program is going to be an opportunity to hear more about this vital Providence neighborhood from members of the Snowtown Project Research Team. Before I hand it off to them, a bit of information on this project, who's involved, and how it came together. I'm Marissa Brown, the Assistant Director for Programs at the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities. Sorry, one sec. Okay. I'm Marissa Brown, the Assistant Director for Programs at the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage at Brown University, and a member of the Rhode Island State House Restoration Society, a nonprofit that works to interpret and preserve the State House and its grounds, some portion of which is on land that once was Snowtown. The Snowtown Project came about through a series of community meetings organized by Janiyah Kizzy in 2019. Kizzy was then part of a subcommittee of the State House Restoration Society. The meetings were open-ended. We basically sent out emails to friends and colleagues asking who was interested in getting together to work collectively to unearth the history of Snowtown and to create a series of public programs to tell this history more widely. Many meetings later, here we are at our first public event. This slide gives you a sense of this collective working group. Some are affiliated with history, community, and arts organizations in Rhode Island, and others are not. Some have attended a single meeting, and others come to every single meeting. There's usually a meeting each month devoted to research or public programming, planning, and a curriculum group will start meeting in a few months. If you're here, you registered for this event, so we can add you to the email list to hear about upcoming meetings and plans if you'd like to be added, and we'll be in touch after this event to find out. So, before we begin this afternoon's program, we'd like to open up the chat box for a second so we can hear from you. Give me 1 second to do that. Okay. And you can hear from each other. When I say go, please open up the chat box if you'd like to, and you can write down why you came today, or what interests you in particular about the life of Snowtown, or if you have some information that's relevant to the history and life of Snowtown, please write it in the chat box. So I'll just give you sort of a moment to think about whether you'd like to share some of that with everyone before we begin. And when I say go, we will see a sort of waterfall of sharing that'll happen in the chat box. Go. So anyone who'd like to go ahead and just share what brought you here tonight and what interests you about Snowtown. Oh, great. Someone's saying he mentioned Snowtown when he gave environmental justice tours to young doctors, people who are really interested in the history of Snowtown, rediscovering parts of Rhode Island that they didn't know about, and a lot of people who are wanting to know more about it, want to support the research, and never heard of it. So we're here to learn more about this history. Okay, wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. So we will, in a second, I'm going to give people still a chance to kind of add to that box. And then as the presentations start, we'll close the chat box down, but it will be open again at the end so people can ask questions through the chat box to the moderator. One more note, Snowtown no longer exists, we know that, but we can bring places back in some ways by remembering and honoring them together. This event honors the neighborhood and all of those who made a home in it, and we all thank you for joining us as we together remember and honor Snowtown. With that, I'll turn it over to Traci Picard, the co-chair of the Snowtown Project Research Team.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen so we can just take a quick peek at who is this in this research team. Okay, can we see this? First, I'll introduce myself very quickly. My name is Traci Picard. I'm a public historian and a researcher from Providence. And I have a special interest in labor, undervalued stories, undervalued methods in 18th century health and medicine. I am extremely honored to be with you today to share what we've been talking about and learning together. This is a list of the amazing research team: Joanne Melish, co-chair, myself, Ted Coleman, Christopher Roberts, Kate Wells, Heather Olson, Inka Mike, Sylvia Soares, Andrew Polta, Jared Pakati, Reka Rocha, Beatrice Pulliam, Jennifer Galpern, Elaine Stiles, and Katarina Weigold. Thank you all for working so hard on this project. We've been meeting regularly for about a year or so to share all of the different things we've been learning, our own resources, our new research, to discuss and above all else to ask questions together about Snowtown itself and all of the area and issues surrounding it. We've been extremely excited to learn more about the historical evidence, but also the meaning and interpretation of it. One of our most important interests is people. We've all been curious, not just about the names of the people who lived here, although that is interesting, but also about their lives. What kinds of work did they do? Where did they eat? Where did they shop? Who did they love? What did the actual structures and houses in Snowtown look like? What was in those houses? Where did they get their drinking water? One thing that's become clear is that we absolutely don't have all the answers to these questions, and we probably never will. But by looking very specifically into the people who live there, and by valuing the details of their lives, I think we've been able to ask better questions. It's been important from the very beginning for us to innovate our sources. Looking at the very few available books and newspaper articles is useful, but this has already been done. We're really more about coming at both this place and the people who live there from as wide a variety of sources as possible and using as broad a lens as we can. We've also been asking a lot of questions about memory. What does it mean to remember Snowtown? Marginalization. What does this mean? Marginal to who? Marginal to what? It's clear that there are some glaring reasons for people to be othered in mid-1800s Providence. Race and class immediately come to mind. But we're also interested in some of the less obvious threads of social marginalization. Can we find evidence of queerness, mental and physical difference or disability, of rebellion against the deeply ingrained patriarchal structures? What if we look at divorce, widow or single women, or anyone questioning or defying the strict Protestant norms? Above all, our primary methods have been creativity, persistence, and care. I'd like to introduce you to our first, let me stop sharing. Okay, I'd like to introduce you to our first panelist today, Marco McWilliams. Marco is the Associate Director of Education and Training and an activist with nearly 2 decades of engaged scholarship work in convening diverse learning communities. Honestly, his biography is so long and so exciting that I had to shorten it in the interest of time, but I'd like us to welcome Marco McWilliams.
Greetings, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me using this technology. I thought that I would open us up with a famous poem by the legendary Lucille Clifton as a way to orient the conversation that we want to have today. they ask me to remember, but they want me to remember their memories. And I keep on remembering mine. I think that we are on the precipice of a moment where we see the convergence of power moving not just through our present moment, but a power that comes from a historic kind of memory and forgetting. Memory is an access point. It's an access point that allows for the stories. The stories, as Traci said, the stories of the forgotten, the stories of those who were furthest away from power, those who were marginalized. And in this moment with Snowtown, we have an opportunity to reclaim not only sort of physical terrain, but in many ways, more importantly, to reclaim memory. Memory is a primary transmitter of culture. In our memories, we see the blueprint of how change is created. In our memories is the blueprint of futures imagined. And so memories are the architecture for those who have been positioned, situated at the margins. I often, when I'm leading walking tours along Providence's east side, and of course we make these stops in and around the community in Snowtown, and the walking tours are free and anyone can come along. And so folks who are nowhere near, have never lived in and around the east side or around that sort of like privilege and power and access. And they always say I didn't know all of this was here. Like a city that they grew up in, they lived in all of their lives. And this is crazy. I've been by these places and through these places, but you mean right here? This was right here and that was right here. And I'm like, yeah. And how does that make you feel? What do you think about that? And it's a pivot point. There's a way in which they feel an investment in that space, in that community, in a way that they had never imagined before, because they found memory there. They found voices there. They found, in some cases, they saw how Black people were moving with love there, were moving with resistance there. This is the power of memory. And in this moment, in the inauguration of the Snowtown Project, we have the opportunity to do that for not just this city, not just this state, but for the country. Because Providence in Rhode Island as a colony and then as a state is the epicenter for the origins of so many of these memories, so many of these stories. And I'm excited to begin this journey with folks in the community to plug in and connect their voices with that, to connect a younger generation, right, of children coming up in school who won't have to go back and reclaim this because it'll always be present for them, right? They won't have to scour about to find someone's book that maybe they would have never read. It'll be a part of their memory, a part of their collective understanding of the city that they grew up in. And lastly, I'll say, there is a particular kind of ethics, and even I would argue morality to this. We have an obligation to the ancestors, right? To be the voice that they never had a century plus later. For me, there is very much deeply, I would argue, a ethical, moral obligation to do this work. So it's not just a good project idea for the city and hope we get a bunch of grant money and funding. It's like, no, like we got a story to tell, if I can borrow from a hip hop artist. And so, yeah, let's all tell this story together. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. That was really amazing, as usual. Our next speaker is going to be Ted Coleman. He'll be talking about the location of Snowtown and showing us some maps and images. Ted is a local researcher whose major interest is the geography of early Providence. The edges and backgrounds and antique photographs of Providence are always of particular interest to him. While doing research over the years, he sometimes stumbled into Snowtown and was excited to find a group actively investigating the neighborhood. Let's welcome Ted Coleman.
Hello to everyone. I would like to share my screen. Snowtown was a neighborhood that developed on the north shore of Providence's Great Salt Cove. This is an image of the cove from about 1815, looking from Carpenter's Point near Federal Hill toward the east side. And you can see that the east side and the south side are all well developed, but the north side is still huge sandy bluffs and marshland. And that's where Snowtown developed. Northeast of Great Point, the property was owned by the Steele family, who had inherited the land from his wife Hulda's grandfather, John Crawford. They had built a soap and candle factory on the North Shore and were trying to operate it, but in 1796, someone filed a complaint against them with the town council, and the town council decided to go in and survey the property, and they laid out a street across the Steele's land, and the soap and candle factory closed down, and the Steeles instead plotted their property for house lots. About 1800, a Providence housewright by the name of Josiah Snow filled in lot number 1 and built the first house in the neighborhood that would become known as Snowtown. The 1810 census indicates that there were 4 families living in Snowtown at that time, 2 of whom were Black and 2 of whom were white. The 1820s brings us the first image of Snowtown. This gambrel-roofed house near the little island was a Snowtown landmark for many, many, many years. At this point in time, it's a boarding house for sailors, for laborers, for anyone who needs a short-term place to stay. During the 1820s, there are a number of things that happened in Providence that affected things. One of them was the Hardscrabble riot, which happened on the opposite side of Smith Hill on the north end. And the other thing that happened was they built the Blackstone Canal, which was supposed to bring prosperity to Providence, but didn't quite do that. This image of Providence is from about the 1840s, and you can see Canal Street, which was built for the canal, plus the causeway that goes from Canal Street over into Snowtown. Here's the gambrel roof house. the original St. Patrick's Church on top of Smith's Hill, and the prison that was built in 1836 to provide some moral inspiration for the residents of Snowtown. In the mid-1840s, the railroad decided that they wanted to connect to Providence, and they came in and proposed to use the public waters of the cove for their own private purposes. As part of this, they had planned to go across what would have been part of Snowtown, which is in this quadrant right here. The proposal wasn't universally accepted, but it eventually went through, and the railroad cut a swath through Snowtown, through the back street, and through Hardscrabble. At that time, they were all heavily inhabited by both blacks and whites. And they accomplished, by building the railroad, what the riots never did, which was to get people to move out. Not everyone moved out. Some of the long-term residents stayed. They would not leave. And Snowtown itself picked itself up and built itself back up. This is a photograph of Snowtown from about the early 1870s. You can see St. Patrick's Church at the top of the hill and the row of houses that are running along Upper Gaspee Street up to Smith Street. One of the interesting things about this, the angle of this photograph, it allows us to associate some of these buildings with the original lots that the Steeles had laid out on Gaspee Street. This right here is actually the Zion Church, which was built in Snowtown and was a Snowtown landmark for many years. This is a photograph of Snowtown from the top of the town hall. It basically shows almost the same view, looking straight up Gaspee Street towards Smith Street. At this point, there's a lot of big boarding houses in Snowtown. This is the Walker Street section of Snowtown, which developed later. And one of the other aspects of Snowtown that most people don't realize is it wasn't all big houses. There are a whole group of small houses spread out through the different parts of Snowtown. And that they will appear in some of the further photographs. This is a photograph of Snowtown from Smith Hill, showing the lower edge of Snowtown right next to Francis. Francis Street is actually at just beyond the right edge of this photograph. And you can see the group of small houses, large boarding houses, and a very, very tiny house where people lived at that time. This is early 1870s because the city hall is not here yet. This is an 1889 sketch of the small house, which is located right there. It was apparently a subject for lots of photographs at the time, and hopefully some of the photographs that used to exist of Snowtown will come back into the public sphere when people realize what they are. We've moved slightly to the east. You can still see the small house at the right edge of the painting. There's large boarding houses. The railroad has taken over the complete east side of Gaspee Street. Here's another one of the small houses on the hill, and it's flanked by another large boarding house. This is the main crossing in Snowtown, and here's that gambrel roofed boarding house that appeared back in the 1825 drawing. It's flanked by large boarding houses, which are one of the big characteristics of Snowtown in the latter part of the 19th century. These drawings were done by the Providence Journal just as they were starting to get ready to build the state capitol and knock all of this stuff down, but they realized that some of these images were worth recording. This is the view from Railroad Crossing Street up Gaspee Street towards Smith Street, and you can see again that gambrel roofed house is right in the middle of it. This is probably the last view of Snowtown ever taken. It's taken from the grounds of St. Patrick's Church, looking south down Gaspee Street toward the foundry, the Cove Foundry, which is built on the west side of Francis Street. You can still see some of the large boarding houses and buildings that we had seen in some of the earlier photographs, but much of the area has been cleared. Much of Gaspee Street has now been cleared, and the timeline for these houses is quite limited because construction on the state capitol is going to begin. I'd like to bring your attention to these two houses right here on the left corner, because they show up. Oh, my picture's gone. They actually show up in the photograph of the cornerstone laying of the State House from October of 1896. That is about the extent of the images that I have for Snowtown. I hope I was able to give people a good grasp of where it was and what it looked like. And I will pass this on to the next person. Oop, I have to stop sharing.
Thank you, Ted. You are wonderful as always. Thank you very much. You did great sharing your screen. The next person I am extremely happy to introduce is Joanne Melish. Joanne is also the co-chair of the Snowtown Research Team. She'll be talking about the context of Snowtown. Joanne is a historian of slavery, emancipation, and early African-American community life, focusing on New England. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about where the people came from who came to live in the mixed race neighborhood known as Snowtown, beginning around 1800. Where did they come from and how did they come to reside there? People of African descent, of course, had first arrived in Providence among the captives brought to Rhode Island in the course of the American slave trade that centered here in Rhode Island. At the peak of slavery in 1755, there were about 260 African and African descended people in Providence, nearly all of them enslaved in 1755. And there were another roughly 4,400 spread throughout the rest of the colony, many of them in Newport and in South County, in what was then Kings County. By 1790, about 80% of Rhode Islanders of African heritage and about 90% of those living in Providence had become emancipated. By 1810, those percentages had risen to 97% of those living in Rhode Island and 99% of those residing in Providence. How did they become free people? Some of these people had been born after the passage of a gradual Emancipation Act that provided freedom at majority to all children born to enslaved women after March 1st, 1784. Some enslaved people born before that date, people who would otherwise legally remain enslaved for life, had been individually emancipated by enslavers, either rewarding them for some act or at that point realizing that the passage of the act signaled that slavery was on its way out as a viable institution. Still, other enslaved people had emancipated themselves by leaving the towns in which they were enslaved to seek a free life in other towns. A number of them moved from outlying towns to Providence. Why would they do that? Because they could disappear to some extent, into the large mobile population of the second largest town in Rhode Island after Newport. At least 10% of white families with enslaved laborers working in their households also had indentured servants who had been bound out as children to work in these households until they reached their majority. Some of these indentured children were white, but many of these people were of indigenous or African, some of them African heritage as well. Upon being emancipated by reaching their majority, some formerly indentured Native people moved to indigenous communities in Charlestown and elsewhere, but others, along with formerly indentured whites and people of color, remained in or moved to Providence. So altogether, there were around 900 free people of color living in Providence by 1810. Initially, newly emancipated people remained in the households, most of them, in the households of those who had once enslaved them or held their indentures, now laboring for wages. But gradually they moved out to establish independent households. But the early 1800s was a time of increasing segregation, residential segregation by class as well as by race. In established communities, the availability of rentals or boarding house life and the purchase price of property were increasing, though it was becoming very difficult to live in those areas and increasingly unwelcome for people of economic, at the relative bottom of the ladder, to live there, as well as by race. Many formerly enslaved and indentured people of color, formerly indentured whites, and other poorer artisans and laborers sought cheaper rents and more affordable property in the new plats being established in what would come to be called Snowtown on the north side of the shore that Ted talked about. And a bit later also moved into the area called Hardscrabble that he also mentioned. Some of the new Snowtown residents found work as mariners on commercial vessels or performed manual art or artisanal labor for nearby commercial and industrial enterprises. Others established their own small businesses in and around their homes in Snowtown. There were a variety of enterprises in Snowtown, some of them becoming quite successful over time. White hostility to Black freedom and to Black success was also increasing in the early 1800s. In the rapidly industrializing society of Rhode Island and in general in Providence in particular, white working men who saw themselves being steadily de-skilled by factory labor resented Black independence. They sought respectability, these white labor workers, by disparaging African heritage and claiming white superiority. Increasingly regimented by the factory bell, white men resented the apparent freedom of Black men from factory labor. Now, of course, Black men were almost never offered factory labor. They were not welcome in factories, but nonetheless, white men saw Black men not in the factory and resented it. And self-defined respectable, in quotes, white people condemned the race mixing and what they thought of as vice culture, leisure culture, gambling, other kinds of dance halls, activities that seemed to flourish in neighborhoods like Snowtown. And here again, why were these activities there? These activities were forced into neighborhoods like Snowtown because they were banned everywhere else. It was also the case that by the 1820s, Providence was becoming increasingly reliant on textile manufacture and its ancillary industries. That is to say, increasingly dependent on the availability of cotton grown by whom? By enslaved African-descended laborers in the South, and on Southern plantation markets for manufactured goods, dependent on those as well. This too reinforced local hostility to the notion of Black freedom, race mixing, and abolitionist activism as well. The white mob attack on Snowtown in 1831, leading to the adoption of a city charter in Providence, was one of over 100 such attacks against Black neighborhoods in northern cities in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. Snowtown survived this attack, but as Ted has told you, it could not survive the forces of so-called progress. By the end of the 19th century, the neighborhood of Snowtown had been displaced by railroad construction and urban development, including construction of the State House. So what we of the Snowtown Research Team are attempting to do is recover this history and recover and explore the lifeways and character of this diverse and vibrant community. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay. Oh, very exciting. The next person will be Heather Olson. Heather's going to be talking about the artifacts of the Cove lands. Heather Olson is the Laboratory and Collections Manager at the Public Archaeology Lab in Pawtucket. She spent the last 8 years working with the Providence Covelands Archaeological Collection, analyzing and interpreting the thousands of artifacts associated with Snowtown's residents. Let's welcome Heather.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to very briefly talk about the North Shore Archaeology Site Assemblage, which includes many objects associated with the Snowtown neighborhood. The artifacts were excavated in the early 1980s by archaeologists from Duluth Cather Parsons, who conducted excavations in downtown Providence for the Federal Rail Administration's Northeast Corridor Improvement Project. During their work, DCP identified 2 archaeological sites, the Carpenter's Point site on the south side of the Great Salt Cove and the North Shore site on the northern side within what we know was the Snowtown neighborhood. The artifact collection consists of just over 148,000 artifacts dating from as far back as 5500 BC up through the 19th century. During the initial analysis of the North Shore site's historic or post-contact assemblage, 229 cultural features were identified that related to 3 main time periods, as we define them. Snowtown, dating from roughly about 1820 to the late 1840s, Gaspee Street, dating to the late 1840s to the early 1890s, and the railroad-related occupation of the late 1830s and on. The wide range of activities implied by the numerous features showed a widespread and intensive domestic and industrial use of the site, particularly during the Snowtown occupation period. However, the arrival of the railroad during the mid-19th century forced a major and rather dramatic shift from what was a primarily residential and small business neighborhood to an exclusively industrial zone by the 1890s. I wish there was time to talk about all of the historic period occupations of the site. The Gaspee Street neighborhood of the mid-19th century is also really interesting, but today I'll be concentrating on the early 19th century Snowtown. The main Snowtown era features are 3 buildings, a furnace or kiln, 2 privies, and a variety of other house yard elements. The 3 so-called houses, believed to be dwellings, tenements, or likely both, date roughly from about 1820 through the 1840s, at which time the buildings were torn down and new tenements were built by then landowner George Morse. The kiln, with its large-scale construction and steel-tight slab-lined interior, appears to have predated the 3 houses, abandoned and filled in the late 1820s. Based on historical evidence, we think it may have been associated with the soap making and candle making business owned by Benjamin Steele. The Snowtown artifacts are a large and varied group. In total, about 32,000 artifacts, about 25% of the site's post-contact assemblage, are associated with the Snowtown era residents. In general, the assemblage is quite typical for an early to mid-19th century urban neighborhood. The kitchen ceramics are primarily creamware, pearlware, and whiteware in simple hand-painted or edge-decorated patterns, with a small amount having the more expensive transfer printed designs. There are plain redwares and stonewares used for food storage in a variety of forms and styles. Other more costly ceramics are sporadically mixed in, including down here, this lovely pink lusterware English bone china saucer with an Adam Buck style mother and child print. These are really cool. A beautiful Castleford style stoneware teapot and a black basalt teapot in the early 19th century revival style. There's a smattering of Chinese style patterns, a fantastic creamware plate with embossed clover along the edge, and even a transfer printed picture over here with a scene of the Boston State House, not the Rhode Island State House, that was made during the 18-teens. There are many, many glass liquor and wine bottles, household product bottles, medicine bottles, glass tablewares like decanters, wine glasses, and tumblers. Other objects include work-related artifacts like this sharpening file up here, and a snaffle bit, and a handled redware pot with encrusted paint drips, evidence of a messy painting job. We have lighting-related objects like a candle snuffer, a fireplace jam hook for holding your fireplace tools, and glass oil lamp chimney fragments. Clothing-related items such as buttons, beads, straight pins, and a lacing bodkin, and personal artifacts, including a few small denomination coins, smoking pipe fragments, children's ABC plates, writing slates and slate pencils, and these are pretty cool, ebony-backed ivory or bone dominoes. Overall, the artifacts reflect the daily work and home life of working-class Providence in the early 19th century. Unlike working with historical records, it's difficult and in some ways can be almost impossible to associate specific people with specific artifacts at archaeological sites such as this. It's something archaeologists love to do, but often we can only infer the general conditions and lifestyles of the residents from the objects that are found. Sometimes, though, we get glimpses of the residents through the study of certain objects. For example, Snowtown's work-related artifacts are associated with general labor, as well as mechanical and craftsman work. They include paintbrush fragments, shovel fragments, wooden barrel or bucket fragments, fragments of a bone folding ruler, these right here, measuring weights, lead bale seals, tool sharpening files, iron padlocks, even a wooden stake fragment. These are associated with general labor and craftsman work, such as painting, drafting measured drawings, weighing, packing, or securing commercial goods. Other objects found at the site can be associated with Providence's maritime activities like copper boat nails and ship ballast stone. The early Providence directories identify numerous laborers in the Snowtown area, as well as draymen, persons who delivered goods, blacksmiths, an oysterman, a cutler, a cord winder, which I found out is actually a leather worker or shoemaker, a waiter, ship rigger, and a weaver, just to name a few. Whether any of these work-related objects are associated with these specific residents is unknown, but certainly something to think about. Archaeology, as you can imagine, can paint a very compelling picture of what life was like, filling in the gaps left in the historical record when we study those who did not write their own histories. We have just about every kind of object you can imagine someone in Snowtown would have used in their daily lives. And while we know that this neighborhood was home to some of the poorest residents in the city, there are objects from the site that you may not expect people to own in a neighborhood such as this. Yes, they were poor, but they also had access to and interest in items that are not typically associated with the poor working class. There are costly transfer printed ceramics, lead crystal tablewares, writing slates and slate pencils, ink bottles, so some of them could read and write, patent medicine bottles, pharmacy bottles, hair and body combs, dominoes. These are the things that can captivate and inform us like nothing else. Some of the broken glass vessels and window glass fragments in a couple of the Snowtown House Foundation, along with what appeared to be structural repairs, have even been linked to the Snowtown riot. More work is needed to expand on that interpretation, but it's something we can certainly plan to work on. We're going to continue combing through the historical records and looking closely at the archaeological record to help build the world that the Snowtown residents occupied. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I'll give you a moment to unshare. Okay, so the next section that we're going to be talking about is people and stories. First, I'll introduce this section, talk about our methods, then we'll have Andrew Polta share, and then I will talk about a person. So first, people and stories. So when we first met, not just the research team, but the entire group of people, we all agreed that the story of Snowtown is more than just a riot. It seems as if every single meeting, someone would stand up and say, excuse me, can we make sure that we talk about more than just this 4-day incident? And we all agreed, we were all very curious to hear a lot more. So as I mentioned, the team established early on, we would prioritize people. We combed through many sources. We made lists and charts, forms and spreadsheets, lots of spreadsheets, with every detail we could find. No scrap of evidence was too small. We've used a lot of different sources. The Providence Town Council records, logbooks of people who hired seamen and workmen, seamen's protection certificates, which are a kind of passport for men, mostly men, going to sea. I just wanted to share quickly one of the sources that I've been using to do my research. I've spent the past 6 months diving deeply into a very special collection at the Providence City Archives. I would like to thank Caleb Horton and his interns for all of their assistance in the City Archives. This collection is called the Writs and Warrants. I've made my way so far from the 1790s, where this collection starts, to 1835. It is all of the surviving documents from the Providence County Justice Court, which was a kind of small claims court which dealt with the non-payment of debts as small as 50 cents, ranging up to about $100, as well as interpersonal issues like assault, desertion, and so-called bastardy. This presents a kind of snapshot of daily life during this time. Attached to these writs and warrants are grocery receipts, rent bills, clothing and shoe purchases, home building, labor, and the ever-present "for value received." It's when you don't want to tell them what you're up to. This has helped me connect a lot of these artifacts and images to the greater context and story happening in Providence at the time. Everything from what people were being paid for rent, how much they are making a day, a daily wage, to who was staying with whom. A significant amount of detailed information about the people living in and around Snowtown, as well as the overall context of the life in Providence, has come from this collection. So I'm going to introduce Andrew Polta. He'll be talking about Eliza Granger. Andrew first researched Snowtown as part of a master's thesis in history at the University of Rhode Island, which is really quite wonderful. Check it out sometime. He currently works at the Public Archaeology Lab. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Traci, and thank you to everyone who tuned in this evening. So as Traci said, the Snowtown resident that I want to focus on this evening is Eliza Granger. She was a white woman from New Hampshire originally, and she arrived in Providence around 1812. She married a local man, but by 1824 she was a widow, and to support herself, she opened a liquor shop. At first, she rented space from George W. Bowen near Shingle Bridge, which is near Snowtown, but probably not quite in the neighborhood. But she had definitely moved to the neighborhood by 1826 when she bought a house and land on the south side of Smith Street for $1,000. And now I think Eliza Granger is important for two reasons. The first is that she exhibited the tenacity shown by many of the Snowtown residents we found in the archive so far. When Traci talks about Abraham Gibbs in a moment, you'll see something very similar. Eliza Granger was one of several single women, either widowed or unmarried, who carved out a living catering to Providence's marginal neighborhoods in the 1820s and 30s. Neighborhoods like Snowtown, but also Olney's Lane and Hardscrabble. These women ran brothels, boarding houses, dance halls, liquor shops, or something within a few shades of any or all of those categories. For these women, Snowtown wasn't a social problem or a sink of iniquity. It was where they lived, tried to make ends meet, and in some cases ended up doing pretty well for themselves. The second important thing about Eliza Granger is that she exemplified the paradoxical relationship between Snowtown and the, shall we say, more respectable parts of town. To the Providence authorities, Eliza Granger could be a symbol of the social disorder they feared from Snowtown. In 1830, the town took legal action against her for selling liquor without a license, and the first instance for selling between 1 and 10 gallons of gin, and the second 2 counts of selling about a gallon of rum. And in the end, she had to pay about $100 in fines and court costs. However, a closer look at Eliza Granger's relations with the great and the good of Providence complicates what appears at first a simple antagonism between a peripheral neighborhood and the center of town. When in 1826, the town council accused Granger of keeping her liquor shop open on Sundays, she wrote them a letter to refute the charge. In it, she claimed that town constable Edward Harwood could bear witness and prove that she kept an orderly and respectable house. She may have been hinting, not so subtly, that Harwood was a customer and not just passing by on his normal rounds. And whatever the relationship between Granger and Harwood, the council did not follow up on that particular complaint. Eliza Granger also had contacts with one of the wealthiest men in Providence. After her legal and financial setbacks in 1830, the town council held a hearing to decide whether they should grant her a license to sell liquor legally. Arguing on her behalf was a Mr. Brown. Now, this was likely Nicholas Brown of the merchant firm Brown and Ives, and thus one of the wealthiest men in Rhode Island at the time. As with Constable Harwood, the nature of their connection is unclear, but Nicholas Brown did own property in Snowtown near to where Granger lived. So perhaps she lived on her own property and sold liquor in a shop on his, thus giving him a financial interest in her success. It's not quite clear at the moment. Unfortunately for Granger, there were 6 other men at the meeting arguing against her, and the council denied her a license. But the point is, and the final point I want to make, is that men like Constable Harwood and Nicholas Brown did not just look down on or abhor a place like Snowtown. They conducted business there and clearly had contacts with the residents, often as landlords, but clearly, as we can see through the story of Eliza Granger, there were probably personal relationships as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, next I'm going to tell us about Abraham Gibbs. Okay. Mr. Gibbs. Abraham Gibbs is an interesting character. He was born around 1756 in Charleston, South Carolina, and he lived until 1830. The themes of Gibbs' life is that he moves around a lot. He's got a very fluid identity. He doesn't have the kind of occupational identity that we sometimes pin on people in history. He does quite a few different things. He's not afraid to use the legal system to settle debts. And he's also rents out rooms, acts as a landlord, takes on a variety of different jobs. So we're going to take a look at some of the documents that I found about Abraham Gibbs. He's identified as a Black man and a man of color in several sources. And those two words are used interchangeably around this time of the late 1700s, early 1800s. Okay, so he comes to Rhode Island. We don't really know how or why he went from Charleston, South Carolina to Rhode Island. The first known evidence I've been able to find of Gibbs in Rhode Island is in 1785. He has come from some port in the country, as they said, to Smithfield, Rhode Island. At that time, Smithfield is not what we think of now as Smithfield. It was actually a much larger area. So we don't know exactly where he was in Smithfield. So this is actually a bill for victuals, drinks, and lodging. So it's saying that he was staying somewhere in Smithfield with Isaac Arnold. So the next one that we have here is 1779. So this is the bill showing that he was in Providence with Caesar Aborn of Providence. Caesar Aborn was a Black man, and Gibbs actually sued him for cash, $1. Around this time, and we don't know exactly when, he marries Sarah, also called Sally. She's from Smithfield. She's a Black woman that comes from a family that was enslaved. We don't know exactly when he comes to Providence, but we know that in 1799, this is another bill, where he is renting a shop. What kind of shop is it? I have no idea, but we can see that at this time he's entrepreneurial. The reason that this is here is he didn't pay his bill, but he's entrepreneurial. He could be having some financial troubles because he then goes to sea. His wife, Sally, is examined, which means brought before the town council around this time, 1800, and she tells them that he is at sea. This is also the time when he has a seaman's protection certificate, or like I said earlier, a passport telling us that where he was born, his age, and that he was going to sea. We don't know where he went or any other information about that yet. 1799, we have this doctor's bill showing that he owed some money to Edward Dexter, administrator of Dr. Ephraim Comstock. $13, that's a pretty good sized doctor's bill. People made about $1 a day. You can also see here that he signs with his mark at the bottom. At this time, he had 4 children, and one of the likely possibilities is that this is a bill having something to do with the birth of one of his children. This is 1803, so he's returned from sea, we can tell by then, because this is a bill for shoes. He's definitely still in Providence at this time. And there's some type of, this doesn't say specifically, 2 pairs of shoes. And then he also had a pair of shoes taped. So I think that means repaired. And that shows that the value of shoes at that time were so important that people would fix them. The next important thing that happened, I actually don't have a document for, but Abraham Gibbs was sued along with a group of other sailors, quite a few, about 10, by John Brown. That John Brown. John Brown alleged that this group of sailors deserted his ship, the General Washington. So Gibbs had signed on for a trip to sea. It was supposed to sail from Providence to Savannah, but all of the sailors, about 10 of them, deserted the ship. John Brown was quite mad and tried to sue them, but then he died. So we really have no resolution of this case at all. I like to imagine, though, what could have been happening, what they could have been thinking about, how this group of sailors felt about how they were treated, what caused them to leave. We don't know, but it's interesting to think about. At this point, 1803, we have another doctor's bill. It's only $1.50. That's much cheaper, but it's still a good amount of money for people at that time. Here's what I find particularly interesting. This is a rent bill. So Abraham Gibbs in 1809 owes $7.77 to Isaac Pittman, the landlord. That is the cost of 1 quarter's rent was $7, meaning a quarter of a year. At the same time, soon after, Abraham Gibbs actually sues someone else, James Brown, who isn't paying him rent. So Abraham Gibbs is renting from Isaac Pittman, and James Brown is renting from Abraham Gibbs, and they're suing each other for not paying. Now in 1814, we have this $1.75 to 1 day's work at coopering. So Abraham Gibbs is identified as a cooper, meaning someone who makes barrels at this time. So first, he's a laborer, then he goes to sea, then he rents a shop. Now he's coopering. He does a lot of different things. $1.75 is a relatively good wage for the time for a laborer, which was normally about $1. So he's doing pretty well by this time. And this man, Daniel Demeranville, owned a cooper shop, and he didn't pay. Here we have Gibbs's 1814 grocery bill, which includes molasses, rum, sugar, chocolate, a hoe, candles, cheese, lard, and meal, which usually refers to cornmeal. What's interesting about this that stands out to me is that it's not just groceries. You could buy a hoe at the grocery store. It was kind of a mixed amount of things there. So we don't really have very much between 1814 and 1830. The last writ I have for him is in 1815. And then the next thing I find out, his wife, Jenny, is baptized at the First Baptist Church, his second wife. She dies on June 26th. She's buried at North Burial Ground. Then we don't have very much. We know that he passes away in 1830. And at that time, we have proof that he owned 2 houses in the Snowtown. This is a newspaper ad that was placed talking about the sale of the house. The most exciting thing is after he dies, there's an inventory taken of his items, everything in his house. We have a lot of inventories in the Providence records, but we don't have a lot of inventories of people who are Black, people who are poor. And this is a very precious document. It can't be every single thing that was in his house because there's no clothing listed, but it has a pretty good amount of things. And you can see there's a couple of duplicates, most likely because he owned 2 houses. So a couple of the highlights. a table, a stand, a sledge, which is actually a sled, not a sledgehammer, 3 looking glasses, which seems like quite a few, a lot of tinware, 1 old Bible and books, which tells us that he was literate. He owned books, a wheelbarrow, which points to his being a laborer or possibly moving wood and things around from house to house, a wagon, a silver watch, which was one of the more high value items he owned at $4, a lot of oakum, which was rope making items, and 2 pocketbooks, which I'm thinking maybe are little wallets or something that you use to carry things. So I would love to talk for hours about Abraham Gibbs, but I think what really is going to sum this up is to just show that Abraham Gibbs' life is really layered and interesting. And by finding these little bits of information, I've been able to put together a picture and build a relationship with Gibbs in his life. We can't know everything about him, and we don't want to fool ourselves into thinking that we can, but being able to build this idea of what he ate and what he read and what was in his house and who was his, who he was in relationship with has been really exciting. And I hope that I'll have the opportunity to build this out a little bit more and share every single detail of every single document at some point. Thank you. I'm going to wrap this up now because we have an extremely exciting person closing out this panel. We have Ms. Sylvia Soares, and she will be the next speaker. So let me give you her introduction. Sylvia Soares graduated from Brown University in 1995 at 54 years old. She's a professional actress of stage, television, and film. Funded by the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities and the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, Sylvia Ann offers illustrated talks and shows on local Cape Verdean history. She also enacts historical Rhode Islanders of color, such as Nancy Elizabeth Prophet, African-American Narragansett Pequot, who was the first woman of color to graduate from Rhode Island School of Design. Sylvia Ann also enacts the Rhode Island enslaved Sylvie Tory. See more about Sylvia Ann Soares online. Sylvia, take it away.
So sorry, didn't unmute, have to move my hand. Yeah, good afternoon. This is very informative and very excited. I'm so excited to be here with you. In 2004, under a consortium of Rhode Island historical societies, I wrote and directed a piece on slavery, enslavement in Rhode Island, some readings we did, and included was the Hardscrabble Riot of 1824. So subsequently, all these years later, inspired by the present Snowtown Project, I began a play that is set in Snowtown to open up a glimpse of life, of what it might have been like there, circa 1850, maybe more. Well, while research, I'm constantly reminded of my personal connection with this area. Hardscrabble and Snowtown are about 15 to 20-minute walk from my house where I sit right at this moment on Cypress Street. My first home in Providence was early 1940s, was on Bates Street, a few blocks from that only street incident in the Snowtown 1831 riot. And when I was 6, we moved around the corner from Bates Street to Lower Lippett Street, which is now the North Main Street entrance to University Heights Plaza. Our tenement was next to another house that had a large family of immigrant Jews. Both our houses, they stood on the roof line of that present day coffee shop in the plaza. And there were cement steps coming down from our house onto the street level. Well, my mother worked, and so every day, almost every day after school, this Jewish woman, she'd let me pee in her house. And I remember thinking, she's so poor and she's giving me cookies. Well, our neighborhood at that time, still about 1.5 miles square. It went from North Main to a little bit above Camp, from Olney Street to Doyle Avenue on the north side of it. And it was that whole vibrant, hardworking neighborhood, Black, Cape Verdean, Irish, immigrant Jews and Poles, some Native Americans, razed to the ground by the mid 1960s, create University Plaza and the apartments. So, you know, as a child, I had been in some of those homes. They were kept immaculate. You could eat off the back hall steps of some of them. You know. So anyway, my home on Carrington Avenue, my high school home, was also close to Camp Street, went kaput. So when I was in college, my parents purchased this house on Cypress in the neighborhood a few blocks north of Doyle, a white neighborhood from which the whites began to flee in terror from us displaced Blacks invading their domain. And also now, when I walk from Cypress in North Main and cross the overpass over I-95, on my way to the College Post office, I constantly think about another mostly Black, poor white, and mixed neighborhood that was discarded by I-95 and the Corliss post office complex, and parts of Snowtown that were there much earlier disappeared as well, as you've heard, by the railroad. A little girl in the mid 1940s, I recall walking with my mommy down Lippert Street, past a Polish Orthodox church on the corner of Lippert and North Main. That the church was right where that bank is, and to the corner. And we crossed over to the other side, waited on deafening racket of a 3-story factory building, open windows. Well, it's now a 2-story building because of a raging fire that I witnessed as a child. So we hopped a trolley and went down North Main and then down Constitution Hill, nicknamed Prostitution Hill, because of the work that was forced to be taken up by displaced, jobless women, poor whites, Black descendants of the enslaved of Rhode Island. All right, the trolley went past Smith Street Bridge, and instead of that ultra-modern housing that you see on the right there now, I saw across this wide, shambly, shaky wooden bridge over the canal on that property, I saw warehouses and produce carts and trucks being loaded and unloaded and all, and small little push carts being loaded with vegetables or fish maybe. And you know, these little push carts came up Lippert Street, clanging bells, these very weary men trying to earn their livelihood, you know. All right, there on that Canal Street space, before the upscale housing, before the warehouses, was part of Snowtown. You know, I wasn't there then. Well, across from those warehouses, what is now Roger Williams Memorial Park, was broken down tenement houses filled with Cape Verdeans and Blacks and poor whites and some likely Native Americans of mixed ethnicity. Let's come up to 2015. I walked a block from this Cypress home to North Burial Ground to visit the graves of newly discovered relatives. And I was informed they were among the many that were uprooted by the construction of I-95. So I was guided to a little small plot, a little area that had, I don't know, 30 to 40 markers planted so closely together that it was obvious There were no more remains of those citizens whose families had paid for sacred burial plots. So, who were all these people? These people who lived so earnestly, who lived so steadfastly, struggle after struggle. And I mean, what was in their minds, their hearts? So my Snowtown play is a compelling, multi-ethnic piece that is reflecting the social, cultural, political, economic situation of that time. I have my own library. I love investigating on my own, but what I was writing was verified by the fascinating research of the Snowtown Research Team. And I also found on their site some awesome new offerings that are enhancing my project. So I urge artists, historians, project makers who visit their site, look at some of this research and spark your creativity and bring some projects to the future Snowtown Project programming. And we'd love to work with you. I'd love to work with you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Sylvia. So I think at this time, we're going to be asking people to send their questions. We've got 2 right now, so I'll ask those first. In the meantime, go nuts. Give us your questions, and I will read them out loud. So we have a couple quick questions first. This is, I think, most likely for Ted. How far away was Snowtown from Hardscrabble?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Snowtown was about 10-minute walk away from Hardscrabble. Hardscrabble was located right where the Orm Street off-ramp from 95 North is. It's about a 10-minute walk.
And who owned the boarding houses? Were they owner occupied?
That's in the early 19th century, very few people, there were very few instances of single families being in a house. Usually one family would be there and they would have tenants, but that was in the ordinary houses. In Snowtown, the absentee landlords built these monstrous boarding houses where you would have dozens of families living, working in the adjacent foundries and things like that. So it was a huge mix of small individually owned houses and very, very, very large boarding houses that could be 80 feet long and 40 feet wide. Some of them were just monstrous. And at one point in the late 19th century, the warden's house in the prison was being used as a boarding house.
Right. Thank you. So someone is asking, are there any now pictures handy? I would say, look, yeah, you can see it. It's the Amtrak train station, the Round State House. So I don't have anything ready to go right this moment. If anyone else does, let me know, but you can easily look that up by just looking, search the Providence Amtrak and kind of looking around there. So someone else has asked, anything about the Snowtown riots that you mentioned without discussing? So Joanne, did you want to talk about that? Or is there anyone else who's interested in discussing that at the moment?
Okay. In 1830, there were 2 major Providence riots. There was the so-called riots. Most of us prefer to think of them as mob attacks because the word riot implies that the people in a place are creating an uproar of some sort, and that's not the case. These were mob attacks by white working class men on communities. And there was one in 1824 in Hardscrabble, the attack on Hardscrabble. And there was the 1831 one lasted 3 days, and the militia had to be called out to put it down. Both of these emerged. There are hot button events that today we would not think of. Well, actually, similar kinds of things happen today. White men feeling insulted in some way by the breathing in and breathing out of Black men, of success and so forth. I can't remember the precise item and event, the specific trigger of the Snowtown riot, but Snowtown mob attack. But these were very targeted. These meaning Hardscrabble in 1824 and Snowtown in 31 were very targeted attacks on homes and people of color. Again, these are, especially Snowtown is a mixed race community, but these were attacks on the people of color who lived there and their residences. And again, the Snowtown riot precipitated the town council deciding that Providence needed to become a city instead of a town in order to have a municipal police force. This should not imply that in order to discipline white citizens and protect Black ones, but rather a situation where the town, Cum City, regarded people of color as a sort of source of disorder. Their resistance was a source of disorder and the kinds of activities there. And so the town council decided that Providence needed to be a city that could maintain a municipal police force to, quote, keep order. And they did. But I don't know if someone else can remember exactly what the precipitating event was. Heather?
What I remember is there was a fight between sailors on Olney Street.
Yeah.
And they were fighting back and forth, and one of the white sailors was killed. And that, I think, was the moment when, you know, the mob rallied together and they started going down Olney Street, and they moved across, you know, to the north central part of the town, and then they ended up down on Smith Street. The militia was called, the governor was involved. The people would not disperse. The militia said, we're gonna shoot if you don't disperse. And they said, no, shoot anyway. And they did. And I think it was 7 people in the end ended up dying, but they were throwing rocks. They were pulling houses down. And it was a big issue. So that's what I recall. Please, anybody else?
And let me just say there are extant in the archives posters, sort of, let's gather and get those people in Snowtown. I mean, there was it was an organized attack. The second and third, I think, days were organized by paper.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I have is to Andrew Polta. How did you become interested in disorderly housekeepers like Elijah Granger?
Yeah, well, I think kind of what, like, during your talk, Traci, you talked about like all of the sources and kind of you can, and all the things they can tell you. And it was, I didn't have that clear of an idea of a project, and I'd kind of gone down one road and it hadn't really panned out. And so I was just looking through the town council records and started seeing the patterns of all of the people would talk about who they were staying with, and you started seeing the same names over and over and over again, and kind of starting to chase a few of those names through different sources, and then that kind of the kind of detective work of putting the puzzle pieces of some of those folks' lives together was kind of going down a rabbit hole a little bit, but a fun one.
Okay. Someone asks, what would be the best way to find vernacular everyday street and family photos of Lippert Hill neighborhood that Sylvia described before it was torn down? Approach individual families. One source is the Providence City Archives, and I'm open to anyone else who would like to share other ideas about that.
I've used a lot of digital photographs from the Providence Public Library. Some of the ones that Ted showed are available online in high resolution digital photographs. And the level of detail they show, the everyday part, if you can figure out what part of town you're in, because sometimes, it can be hard if these photos weren't labeled. But that is a really, really good resource too.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing, public PPL. Marco, did you want to unmute?
No, it's okay. We can continue.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I was circling back to something Professor Melish was brilliantly trying to lay out. And I just wanted to just briefly build on that, just to say that
Please.
One of the things that we should understand in this moment is that Black life, Black autonomy, Black independence, Black people just living as Professor Mellors brilliantly said, Black people just breathing. The autonomous nature of that, right, of a Black community is always historically here in the US read as a threat, right, in white society. And so we're talking about Snowtown or Hardscrabble. Of course, we can talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We can talk about Rosewood in Florida, right? We can go to Philadelphia in our modern era with the MOVE movement. Any of these, like, what is read as radical attempts at self-autonomy. Or we can distill it down to a Black woman just deciding that she's not going to give up her seat on a bus. These things are always read as a threat. And so this is why you see, this notion of like a so-called race riot. I just wanted to circle in and join, my comments with Dr. Melish too, because some, folks don't, I know in my talks, this is what people often misunderstand, right? And it sort of seemed like, oh, well, these two rival gangs, right? One Black and one white, and they're just battling out in the street. And I'm like, no. So the language here and contextualization is profoundly important. That's all.
Great, thank you. So we have a question about the legacy of the Snowtown attacks and the door war. That's not really part of our research, but if anyone would like to take it, it's how did the legacy of the Snowtown attacks influence the door war and the political environment of the 1831 to 1842 era?
So if I might, again, just briefly, what do we see happen in that moment? Black men reform themselves in a militia and make sort of the kind of deal with the devil that Black folks have to make with the law and order party and this period, who were the party of sort of the wealthy, white male elite in Providence. Why are they joining forces? Because Black men want to vote. And you have on the other side, the crew for which Dorr represents, and there's some complications around that, but like he's aligned himself with this group. And they don't want Black men to, they hold a vote, they hold a convention, and the group says, no, sorry, you can't vote with us. It's that group of white men who will then begin to make an attempt to say, you know what, we're just going to take over. The law and order party is afraid. And so they will bring on this group of armed Black men who are allowed to keep their guns, and they say, well, hey, we know how to fight. We're familiar with that. Around election, around voting in this period, there's so much energy in this period that we have to go back and look at this history. It's so much taking place in the decades in this moment. Oh my, I could keep talking. I know we gotta keep moving. There's so much just right there in the period of even just those 3 decades. Oh my goodness. Please, Professor Melish, you gotta say something here. There's no way you can like stay muted around this.
Well, you know, Black men had early on in most of New England, there hadn't been specific laws against Black men voting because there had been, to vote, you had to meet property requirements. And there were so few Black men who could meet them that the occasional Black man, now again, it's all men, of course, until the 20th century, but the occasional Black man did present himself to vote occasionally because he had enough property to qualify for the vote. Once folks like the Doors people, that the whole point there was that white working men in an industrializing world didn't have property and thought that they should have the vote by virtue of being sort of heads of families in Rhode Island. And so throughout the North, once there were, once the universal male suffrage, regardless of property, you're going to be able to vote. Throughout New England and the North, true in Philadelphia as well, and New York, well, a little different in New York, once you extended the vote, irrespective of property, the word white came in there. So the minute by class, every adult male could vote, the word white came in there. And Black men, I think in 1822, lost the vote in Rhode Island. They lost it in almost all of the North. So, but white elites are pragmatic. And as Marco said, here we have so they can't vote, but along comes how do the Federalists fight off the Dorr Rebellion? How do they call themselves the Law and Order Party? How do they establish authority? Because the Dorr people passed a competing constitution, a people's constitution, and the Law and Order people were enraged of the Charterites, and they wanted to maintain their control. These were white elites. They were appalled by some of them are immigrant working class people that were supporting Dorr's position. They wanted to get their power back, and so they turned to Black men to do it. And the deal was, okay, you support us and we will restore your vote, which they did in the 1842 Constitution that went into effect in 1843. But again, totally pragmatic. I would say another in a long line of situations where when people of color are useful in some way or another, all of a sudden they come to prominence. White people will court them. And then when they're no longer necessary, they stop doing that. And that the Dorr Rebellion, actually Thomas Dorr himself originally wanted to extend the vote. He didn't want the word white in there, but he was overruled and he went with it. He could have resisted and he did not. And he said, okay, it'll be white men. It's a situation that repeats itself in various ways over and over and over. This rising to prominence for a specific purpose by powerful white men, and then okay, that's over. Is that what you wanted? what you wanted me to talk about, Marco?
Yeah, no, I wanted you to, I'm like, you've been a historian on this for a long time. I'm like, we got over 100 people in here. Got to tell the truth to the people. Yeah, no, that's exactly. And because in this period, many Black people own property. They have businesses. They're living lives, and so they're saying, "Wait a second, how are these folks want to vote? These white, they just got here. We've been here. We have churches. We have our own schools. We read. We write. We're educated, right? They're making this argument, and then they get pushed out. And they're like, no. We fought in every battle, the Revolutionary War. Like, are you kidding me? And this European immigrant just showed up and now he's going to tell us we can't vote? I don't think so.
Yeah.
This is the history repeating itself. Thank you, Professor.
So I think we're going to welcome Andrew because you've got your hand up here, and then we're going to wrap it up soon after that. Go ahead, Andrew. We can't hear you.
Sorry. I just wanted to add a small point on that. I agree with what Marco and Joanne have been saying, and just to tie a little bit back with Hardscrabble and Olney's Lane. I think that you could definitely argue that the Dorr War is part of this kind of long trend in which white men are pushing or are trying to push men of color and women out of public and social spaces. So the Hardscrabble riot and Olney's Lane are a way of asserting that kind of social and political dominance, and that the Dorr War in some ways is that same trend where you're going for universal white manhood suffrage. And it's kind of this like, populist is obviously not the best word for it, but often associated with Andrew Jackson, and kind of this like upwelling of kind of working class white men demanding political power. And in order to do that, they push anyone who is not them out of public and social spaces. So it's the same, the Dorr War is kind of the same sort of trend that you're getting in the Hardscrabble riot and the Olney's Lane riot, and in kind of riots up and down the Eastern Seaboard in like the 1820s through 1840s. That was all. Thank you.
Of course, meanwhile, you've got minstrelsy going on. You've got working class white men watching the various sorts of ridiculing of people of color. You've got broadsides up making fun of people of color who have the temerity to be behaving as though they are citizens. I mean, there's a whole cultural context as well as a political one.
On that fabulous note, let's wrap up this talk. Thank you everyone for coming, and I'm going to hand it over to Lane Sparkman.
Thanks, Traci, and thanks so much to the panel. I mean, that was just such an amazing series of presentations, and I sat, listening with rapt attention, as I know, based on my quick glances at the chat, everyone else did. It's just so interesting to see what you've learned, how you've learned it, and I think it does kind of whet everybody's appetite for, what's next, for your research team, and then, what we can maybe do with this information. I do want to tell you a couple things. Number one, we will email everybody who registered for this event. We'll email you a copy of the Zoom recording. So if you want to rewatch any of it, you can, and you can also feel free to share it with friends or colleagues who might not have been able to make it tonight. Eventually we'll have a website, or it might just be a Facebook page, but where these things can live in a way that you can just point people to it rather than having to email it yourself. But we will preserve the talk and make it available as much as possible. We will also email you about our next event, which you can see up on the screen now, Restoring Seneca Village, Lessons for Providence's Snowtown with Cynthia Copeland. Cynthia ran this project in New York City. Seneca Village was a principally Black neighborhood in what is today Central Park, and it was taken over through eminent domain to make Central Park. And so her work with Seneca Village is, I think, going to offer us a lot of good guidance and information for how we might think about Snowtown and how we might move forward with this project. And special thanks to Eric Christensen, who is part of the State House Restoration Society's interpretation working group. Sorry, I'm part of it too. So Marissa and I co-chair the group, and Eric is one of our members. And through Rhode Island College, Eric has managed to bring Cynthia to us virtually at the end of the month. So we'll also email you about that, so you can put that on your calendars. And then later this summer, as the weather warms up, we're actually going to try and do some outside, we were calling them discovery walks, but we in the programs committee heard from the research team that they were actually walking the landscape of Snowtown. They were down there with maps, walking around, trying to kind of understand what was what. And that sounded like such a fascinating thing for anybody else to do, that we're going to try and arrange a way that we can do it in small, socially distanced groups outside in the summer months. And again, we'll let you know about that via email, the email that we have from your Eventbrite registration. So thank you so very much to the incredible research team and to everybody who joined us tonight. Stay tuned. There's going to be so much other great stuff coming, and you can respond to the emails that we send if you want to learn more about any part of the Snowtown project. But thanks so much, everyone, and have a terrific evening.
Do we have to go?
Everybody. Very nice.
Well, people are leaving quickly, but wow, research team, holy smokes, that was just great. And I mean,
amazing.
You can see the chat later maybe, but just tons of congratulations and oh my goodness, and so on and so forth. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Did you all know what all of you were going to be presenting, or were some of you kind of hearing everyone else's research for the first time?
I learned some new things, definitely. I need to talk to you, Ted.
Ted, you're very mysterious, not having turned on the video, so everyone's going to want to know, who is the mysterious Ted Coleman?
I was taking notes.
Same.
Well, I look forward to actually watching it again myself, because honestly, every once in a while I got distracted because I was trying to monitor this or monitor that. So I think I'm going to go back and re-listen at the very least, as I suspect a lot of people will actually.
I feel so boring compared to Ted and Sylvia and Marco and Traci. I mean, everybody was dynamic and wonderful.
So were you. It was all.
You always bring this rich information so succinctly said and
I
covered.
feel so boring.
No, it's a good synthesis. That's the thing. You've got the wider picture. I am way too drilled down to the site without understanding the greater context.
Yeah,
So I'm learning.
Also, I just wanted to say, folks who are still here, I'm working on this. I did give everyone the option to unmute themselves if there are people who hung around and want to chat with us. And I think you can turn on your video if you want, if you want to join in the conversation. Yeah, good, you can. Oh, good, nice to see you, Elon. Good. All right, yeah, and so you all have microphone access too.
Oh, it's Elon. Oh my goodness.
I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I really appreciated this whole thing. I miss everybody. This made me almost cry a few times because I had done so much research on Snowtown and I was like, this is great. Everyone, so much amazing history that I hadn't heard before. It was just brilliant. So I just want to say thank you, everybody.
Do I hear Simon in the background? Is that the bang, bang, bang?
There he is.
Ah.
Yeah. So I had an idea this past week, and one thing that I am planning to do is I'm trying to, and I know you're still on here, Liz, I'm trying to round up some of the original excavators from the archaeological excavations in the early 1980s. So I'm trying to arrange kind of a virtual meetup and ask questions and learn stories. So I'm hoping to do almost an oral history of the archaeology. So stay tuned for that.
So will that be a Zoom?
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah. I have so many questions about the excavations and what they saw, and all the stories of being out there in December at the foot of the State House. So I think that'll be fun.
They did it in December?
Part of it, yes. Yeah, they had these big snow-covered or plastic-covered almost igloos to dig underneath, from what I could see.
Yeah, no, we did. I was out there, and I don't know if Mary Lynn Rainey is still on.
No, she's not. Mary Lynn left.
Okay, but we were out there, and I will apologize ahead of time if my dog barks. But we were out there during the phase 2, after we did the archaeological component of it. I was out there till around February doing construction monitoring, which was, leaning on a shovel, watching a backhoe dig when it's in the middle of the winter in Rhode Island is not a thrilling activity. But we did do that. But I know that, and I don't know if she got on, but I know that Mary Lynn and I and Donna Spellman had all signed up for this, and we were all part of that team. And there are others who are still either around or working in archaeology who are part of the team that we might be able to gather up. So
That'll be fun. That'll be a lot of fun.
It was really, and it was such interesting research, because I just remember doing the research and finding the, there were, people kept going to the town council and wanting to throw people out of town, and then they would come back and, John, one of the Browns, I can't remember, kept saying, no, don't do this. And there was definitely a relationship. I mean, it's been more years than I would like to admit since I looked at this, but it was very definitely really interesting research, and the artifacts were, and there were artifacts that were definitely, like you mentioned, Heather, that were of a higher socioeconomic, if you just look at, the types of economics that particularly that people were attributing to artifacts. When that report was written, there were things that were definitely, a higher economic level artifact than you would have thought. So were they hand-me-downs? Were they, because of activities that were there, were they making enough money to select these, higher quality things? So it was very interesting, but I'll bet we could get together a group of people to talk about it, because it was a fun project, and we had a really good group of people who worked on it. So
Great. I will be in touch.
okay. Yeah, and I think from the workshop, you've got my contact information, and
I do.
Yeah, and if you don't have my cell number, I can give it to you.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Hey there, you guys. Caroline Stevens here.
Oh,
Hi.
hey.
I don't know how to change my name. Can't figure it out.
Oh, that's Nadav. I was wondering why Nadav was
yeah,
on.
and I've got a little 2-year-old knocking on the window. So sorry, I'm being a little distracted. I just wanted to say that that was fabulous. Also, I am so fascinated in this project in Snowtown, and I don't know what future plans are for the Snowtown project, but if there's any interest in I'd be really interested in getting involved in a programmatic level if there's room for that, or involving Doors Open somehow. My husband just walked in, and I can't really speak for him, but we've talked over time also about kind of things like video projections and media arts, and trying to find artistic ways to really bring this story to life. And so I'm just planting that seed. I don't know if there's room for that or not, but
There's always room.
Okay.
Yeah, and specifically room, we've been kind of just germinating ideas around how to bring artists into kind of, not just responding, but like doing work that is itself a way of knowing and remembering and feeling Snowtown.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, we'll definitely be in touch.
All right. Do people have places to go? I don't know if anyone has ever had this. Have you ever ended a Zoom and had people stay on? Actually, we have tried desperately to do that in some of our programs. We did like a careers in public humanities, but people tended to kind of leave right when. Yeah. Are you waving, Doug, or you got something to add?
I can't hear you.
Here, let me.
I don't think any meeting that we've ever had ended on time.
Well,
We
there's that
talk
too.
and talk and talk, and the research team I'm always like, get out.
So, and I think one of the measures of success is if you're a teacher, when you're done with what you're doing, if your students are smiling, that is a big success. So we're all smiling here. I'm smiling. I just think that this is so generative. I can imagine. I live in the Elmwood neighborhood in the south side of Providence, and I can just imagine a kind of a similar project being based in my neighborhood, but also other neighborhoods in Providence, and as a mechanism to uplift the history from being buried and learn from it and have these conversations in the present day with all that is in our conversation channels these days, to seek ways to build a more just society in Providence and in the United States. I just think this is phenomenal. I'm feeling so bolstered by this, by tonight. I'm so glad that I found the opportunity to come in. So I'm taking a bow to you all. Thank you so much. Lessons to be learned. And I won't go on, but I could go on for a long time. Anyways, as some of you know, and so just really thank you. I think you are returning something to the community that is so critical and not really understood as being critical until in the way that it needs to be understood until it's revealed. And so here you are revealing it. I think there's magic in this, and it's transformational. And I believe it can be healing also, because heaven knows we all need to heal from these legacies that we're all living under. So thank you again. I'm gonna mute myself.
I want to say something similar to what Doug just said to all of you guys on the research team. I got chills so many times during tonight, but I was also reflecting on what this night meant before we started, and it just feels like as Doug was saying, like care, love, especially for this neighborhood that's really been lost to time, this feeling that the work you guys are doing is almost like, the ghosts of people who lived in Snowtown can feel it. Like it somehow almost like changes the lives they led by this love and time and huge amounts of labor and care. And it just feels like this very like person to person care that you guys are doing, and it's incredibly moving. I mean, it's like important and historical and all that stuff, but it's also really, really moving.
Thank you for that, Marissa, because
Well, you're
that
part of it.
spirit is part of the spirit of, you know, when Black folks during both the Black Lives Matter movements were saying, say their names. You probably remember the hashtag say their names.
Yeah.
This is in the same spirit of that, right? It's the idea that like, we aren't gonna allow this community, everything that took place there, that we can recover. We're not gonna let it be lost to history anymore. So it is like a rebirth. And Joanne, I want to say your research, your book, your work, I know I myself as a scholar have like eaten off that plate and continue to do so. Like that's, so that, you know, I appreciate you. I knew you through your book long before I ever met you, and I appreciate that. And we got a squad here. We got a nice team.
Yeah.
We got an amazing idea, and yeah, let's do it. Because it's not just this, there's other stuff that I know you all also know about that's gonna be happening here in the city around these issues, 2021, some stuff rolling out 2022. So this is part of a larger constellation, right? Of folks who are thinking around these ideas, artists bringing in new, and when you bring in different folks, you bring in different communities into that conversation. This is, yeah, absolutely.
And this is just a taste, because I filled up my drive to the point where they're telling me you're full. There's a lot.
And you're gonna have to kick me off the Zoom because I'm not leaving. I'm staying here as long as y'all here.
When would you do this? You know, have an event and then everyone just has to leave. You know, that's not normal. You go out afterwards, you talk, you
Right.
process. This is heavy stuff. You know, when I'm thinking about and doing some of this research, you know, there's a lot of processing that has to happen and go through. So to just be like, okay, bye, you know, that's hard.
Yeah, that is true. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Sylvia? Did I interrupt you?
No. I mean, no, I agree. I mean, I was thinking that a while ago, what a variety. Oh, when I was interrupted, yes, you did, because Marissa was saying you guys, and I was saying, well, you're part of it. I mean, we're all part of it. And so you guys too, holding it together. And yeah, such a variety of information and of participants, and there will be more. And I can see this kind of programming going on for a number of years, because it, you know, it will bring people who are inspired about what has happened in their city, and connecting it with what's going on countrywide. I mean, I could go on and repeat everything everybody said. We all know what it's about, but you know, I think it's very important for people to, and they'll appreciate knowing, to use the word ghosts, you use those word ghosts, I use spirits, that, yeah, that's what I'm thinking when I'm writing, because there are things that are happening. And I used to think, when I used to work, I used to wait until I had the most perfect thing before I actually started typing. This time I would get these ideas and write them, just type them down before I forgot, you know, and it would be as though things were just falling into place. And then when I looked at research, it was like, well, yeah, oh, I can say that because that happened. And so there's such a connection, an intuition on a spiritual level as well. So, and that's what I think that is happening. And I feel that we all, for somehow, however we got here, we're brought with, you know, we're resonating with the potential to bring these stories alive. And that's also when people are seeing that, even if their stories aren't the same or they have no connection with the area, they do begin more to open to the underlying connection with history, you know, and I could say a whole bunch of things, you know, and both sides, you know, looking and seeing that it wasn't all a white against the black or the people of color, and it wasn't, and they all weren't poor and bad, but to see the many different aspects of humanity that were happening and still happen. And anyway, I could go on, but that's enough. But
Can I say something quick? It strikes me that this project also is not merely about Providence. I'm thinking about the ways in which, if you look at the council records of the towns in Rhode Island, a lot of these people move, they get warned out of Providence and they go to South Kingstown, and then they get warned out of there, and so there's a semi-mobile population of people of color who are being shoved around in the 10s, 20s, and 30s. And it suddenly struck me that this not just, well, it seems to me that this project should generate interest outside Providence. And also that there are it should stimulate projects like it in other towns. I'm thinking in particular, do you know that there's a very interesting reference to the quote race riot in Matunic Hills in South Kingstown. Matunic Hills is it isn't very hilly really, but it's the north side of Route 1, of the old Route 1. And it was the home of a ton of communities, of residences of people who had just come out of slavery. Many of them have names like Cato, Pierce, names like that. And there's an obscure reference that I haven't had time to track down yet, but I want to the race riot that 3 houses burned in Matunic Hills. And again, it's white people mobbing. And I'm thinking, it's not just and so I want to, and this project inspires me, and I think should inspire people to think, well, now what was that little community in Matunic Hills like? What was it like to inspire that riot? When was that exactly? I haven't been able to find it yet. And what was the texture of those people's lives? So it seems to me that this Snowtown project has the possibility of generating. And again, I'm interested in, I'm sure, I mean, there are other, events, I guess, like this in other places. I'm particularly interested in mob attacks on communities of color and the development, the arc of development of communities of color. But those take place in other places in Rhode Island. This project should inspire a great wave of resurrection of these stories, it seems to me. And
Yeah,
that's exciting.
East Greenwich too, as well. That whole neighborhood of Blacks along the waterfront, that they just got them out of there because they wanted that waterfront to be something special.
Scallop Town, and a lot of those people are native. A lot of those people are indigenous as well as African American people. That's right, and they get wiped out. So I don't know. Wouldn't it be wonderful to spawn a whole?
Well, why not?
Multiple projects on this. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Personally, the one I want people to get interested in is New Gorey in Bristol, which I've asked, historians around here, and they say, there's nothing, but there cannot be nothing. I know that. So I wish, hopefully a group will tackle that, because it's also an, really interesting, tragic story about a neighborhood that existed and was incredibly vibrant. And then, boom, new factories built, community's gone. Where do they?
That's interesting, Gorey. I mean, oh my, yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, right.
The slave castle. I mean,
called New Gorey in Bristol, but
Yeah.
comes from, absolutely. So I would love to have people dig into that. I mean, and I guess I could dig it into myself, but I don't know how to do it the way you guys do. So.
And
people
Lane,
think
isn't it
it's
so
nothing.
interesting that typically when they say, oh, there's nothing, that usually means there's something.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly what I'm trying to say. There's no such thing as nothing.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Of course, if you just look in the history book, oops, I looked in the index and I didn't see anything. Well, yeah, you gotta use creative methods. Look at it from the different side.
Right.
Of course, you didn't see anything when you opened the one book about it.
Right.
Yeah.
You're gonna make it.
So that can be one of the many future projects that comes out of this one, we can hope.
I guess
do
I
we
guess
have
this
like a
squad is
social-
together for life at that point. We got a lot of work to do then.
Do we have like a social media platform that'll be ready to go with all of this, like some hashtagging and all that stuff? It's going to be set up.
This has only been the research team working so far. This is the first kind of coming out of the research team, so that we only just started our email and our Eventbrite, recently. So this has come from, like, all this is coming from this meeting, but this is the first, because we've been kind of working quietly and not publicly. And then the programs is really going to take on this the public side.
All right. I want to join this research team. Let's do it. Let's go. Yeah, no, we need like some, when this rolls out, I'm just thinking of ways that we can engage on social media with this. Which helps to do that expansion, Joan, that I think you're speaking to, because then, I mean, we know how the world is now, like that stuff can start to spread. And part of the reason I say this, to your point, Joanne, I know we're not the only folks thinking about this. There are other folks who are thinking about these things in their communities where they live, in the little pockets, and they're asking the same questions we are, right? And so when we can start to like bridge, make those connections, we'll be able to build something that history will never be able to erase again.
Yeah. Exciting work ahead is what I'll say then.
Thank you all. I'm going to have to sign off.
All right. Bye, Ted. Thanks so much.
That was amazing, Ted. I myself am going to afterwards watch it to hear everyone's again, because I was kind of worried too about
if anybody's got any questions, just email me, because I actually left a lot out.
Wow.
How dare you? How can you say that?
Were you just too scared to hear Julia's ding?
Our 7 minutes.
That was part of it. Because I knew I had too much information to fit into the 7 minutes.
Me too.
And so after I was about 3 minutes in, I started skipping some small paragraphs.
Me too.
But
I was like, oh no.
Everything was extremely interesting. Sylvia, I thought you were just wonderful.
Yes.
You're so inspiring. And
I'm inspired to be here.
It's always so interesting to listen to this group talk. I'm going to have to sign off. Thank you all very much.
Good night.
Thank you, Ted.
I need to leave too, but this was absolutely wonderful. And Ted's, it's the coherence of his sort of populating the place, over time, and and at the same time the landscape moving up and down and so forth. I think I got it in a way, the physical transformations over time in a way I hadn't before.
Visuals.
Man, it was great. But anyway, I think everybody was wonderful. I have to go now. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
And thank you, Andrew. I've been reading a paper. I got stuff up from your paper.
Oh,
too.
good.
I mean,
It was helpful.
Yeah.
Everyone I talk to who's like really cool is crazy about your paper. Seriously.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way you brought to life these relationships, because we think of these parts of town and people as so separated. So I just love that really came through, you know, in daily life, just all of these deep relationships that didn't make it to history, because the stuff we have recorded is just the elite relationships with each other. That really came through. It was really cool.
Thank you.
So Andrew, I haven't seen your paper. Where can I find it?
I know it's on the project drive.
Oh, okay, perfect. I'll just look
yeah.
there. Okay, super.
And Stacy, all these people, all these, God, we have to hear from them in the future in some kind of way. They have to be depicted or something, you know.
You want to use art and performance to depict people?
Well, I'm not saying I'm calling artists in, but yes, yeah, instead of a talk. I mean, a talk would be great too, but we all know that, you know, artistry is a good way to engage people, you know, but based on the research, you know, rather than, anyway. So, I mean, but since these are real people, you're finding real names and
that would be amazing, Sylvia.
I always wonder, you know, that whole neighborhood that I was living in, gone. And I remember faces, and I know that some of those people were descendants of the enslaved in Rhode Island. I also specifically know which some of the families that came from the South too. But I know that people were talking about their grandparents, you know, as though they had been here a while. And it's just really a little disconcerting that no one cared at the time to ask people for these stories and to document actually what happened. So the ones that you're finding, you know, are very rich and very, you know, informative, and I think empowering to many of us of all ethnicity, you know, who care.